Morrow of the Golden Age, Chapter 17. When the people of the Eriviski saw that the Bosporans were coming, they did not hesitate to sally out and do battle. This courage of theirs had won them their place in the region many centuries ago, in a series of migratory wars that cut across Europe from west to east and east to west. As such, the Eriviski were not Illyrian, Dacian or Germanian in their nature, but rather Galati, a strong people from the west, joined tenuously to the people of Gallia by the remote mountain tribes of the Alps, until the Romans had snuffed out any such communication. These were cuts of the same peoples who attempted to migrate further into Greece and Italia, causing endless troubles in previous eras. Since that time, the Galati had waned and others rose, so now they were like a pool of water left amongst rocks by the shore. It follows that they were dark to the world, and the Eriviski had long foreseen a day such as the one on which Pairisades and his 2,000-horse fleet came to the fields outside of their principal city, which was called Lemusa, a name that implied both limitation and concurrent ingenuity in their language called Celticos. That is about all on the culture of these people that can now be known, hence we turn to the downfall that rendered this void of knowledge upon our records. The Eriviski stowed many thousands of warriors in a wood, without any subtlety in their march, so that the Bosporans would be drawn there also. The Eriviski were content that their chosen wood had a long hill to its flank for protection, and they surely believed the wood itself would foil the use of Bosporan horses. This goes to show that they were not in good contact with the Getae, and moreover, that even survivors of the Getae wars did not see fit to warn their old enemies of Lithos' tricks. Therefore, the hill beside the wood was swiftly occupied by one half of Pairisades' force, and the other half, with the king, began to probe at the tree line on the opposite side. This pressure made the Eriviski attend to two potential battles at once, and furthermore, the woods they had thought were sheltering them were actually obstructing their own view of what was happening to their comrades nearby. This took the difficulty of staging a coordinated defense of the position beyond the faculty of the chiefs, which is why arrows pierced their men whenever they came to the wood's edge, and why rumours that there were riders coursing within the wood too were impossible to quell. The Bosporan host, despite being on open display below an empty noon sky at spring break, seemed like monsters of the night, coming and going from the dangerous points of the battle as they pleased, and gracefully avoiding spear, shield and tree alike. By afternoon, the Eriviski had come to fear the forest more than open ground. They came out to offer battle in a formal manner, although no one among the Bosporan vanguard spoke their language, and so didn't know precisely what terms were being offered. Soon enough, a standard kind of battle took place all the same, in which the Eriviski formed a shield line and moved towards the king's company. They must have already resolved to give their lives to the field, since to venture into the Bosporan formation was as foolhardy as trying to float stones in the ocean, and like the sea, the cavalry enveloped and swallowed the useless warriors. The army of Apollon had intended to camp nearby, and when they saw the fires being made at the scene of the battle, they were shocked at how close they had come without realizing what had happened. Such was the king's design. Now though, they came and camped beside the vanguard, where they were witness to ceremonies that made good use of the defeated. According to Strategos Anakletos, there was already a path freshly cut into the forest to expose a clearing within, and the trees harvested were made into a series of rungs in a line. The corpses were hung upon these structures, and then a shallow pit was added beneath them, not even so deep as to trouble one to stride in and out of it. What blood remained in the fallen was drained into these trenches, while various songs were sung, and Anakletos was brought to tears by the way in which songs from Greece were performed so beautifully by people he had considered utterly foreign. The goal of the ceremony was to expedite the healing of the earth by the cycling of life, and demonstrate also to the spirit of Taurus and the eyes of the gods that the king had once again advanced the cause of gold in the world. The next day, the bodies were brought to Lemusa and offered up. This proved to be an unexpected courtesy, and many who might have fought to the death and resigned to join their men were humbled and dulled by sorrow. Some will say this was virtuous and thoughtful of the king, while others will note that by placing the bodies within the very city he hoped to cultivate, this was more an investment into the magic potential left in the empty remains. Either way, the people were busied by receiving their loved ones and performing whatever burials they enjoyed. With this, the small city the Erevisci had built was taken without much further violence, and Pairisades even had his troops camp several miles away so as not to be visible to the townspeople. A small garrison was made nearby to enforce Bosporan law, and the army stayed only long enough for the colonial caravan to catch up. From the local people, Pairisades learned of a fertile opportunity for his new colony, and hence he took his force next to the northwest, to the foothills of the Alps. There was a place here called Bassiana, stationed on a road that linked the trading posts on 2 rivers running west and north. This would be a fine place to monitor and amplify the trade for all manner of purposes. This idea had not been lost on the Romans, who had come out from Italy and massacred the people who lived in the area, called the Silurians. In fact, they had performed this extermination so efficiently that the Silurians were made an extinct race, including their buildings and possessions. This was completed because any survivors or similar communities in the hinterlands were made to flee to other towns who took the chance to enslave them, and some say that a few Silurians were among the colonial group from Apollon, if you like to believe that some meagre justice was restored in the end. That is how the king came upon a site where a large amount of worked stone had been piled up beside the road, and someone had begun the process of laying down foundations over older stones, most likely the major buildings of the Silurian town. The area had been deserted after this work had begun, as the Roman whims passed elsewhere. This presented the ideal place for the new Bosporan colony, if any misgivings from the Romans could be assuaged. Diotrephes wrote that the primary strategy to avoid conflict was to build the colony very quickly and ensure that people weren't coming and going from it until it was undeniably a part of the empire, although this latter stipulation conflicted greatly with the former. Furthermore, Pairisades was not a king like Spartacus, who would fight to protect cultivated land until it was abundant. He had other ventures in mind, and for this we must once again turn the reflections of blame towards Rome. I shall explain what I mean. During this time, the Romans under the Caesar brothers had made loud proclamations that much of Europe was to be brought into their sphere by military means. In practice, this meant that armies regularly went beyond the Alps and brought the unnumbered tribes of the greater region to either submit or be crippled beyond future resistance. In Roman records, they tell tales like these in long and dramatic passages, which usually amount to the wholesale slaughter of naive peoples who were not used to modern means of fighting, in which the Romans specialized. I speak of warfare that does away with heroes and courtesy, and makes bloody produce with heavy equipment, trained leaders, and strict discipline. If the records on these matters which survive report anything close to the truth, then the scale of the massacre the Caesars brought to Gallia renders all criticism of Bosporan injustices as invisible as the cosmos in the halo of the sun. Dictator Gaius Julius Caesar himself is said to have led many bloody raids to slaughter whole villages like they were crops to be harvested. Everyone interested in the topic already knew that the Romans had discovered ancient knowledge which they were holding secret, and this behavior could be explained as a partial understanding of blood magic. However, since the true arts of blood magic were hardly a secret, he could have learned how to restore order among men in the proper fashion, that is, to let it be his own blood that rejuvenated Gallia. Instead, it was the blood of many, many others, and the order of men in that land was not rejuvenated, but almost entirely destroyed, save for the people the Romans brought in to build upon the barely cooled ruins. This is why it was important that the Bosporans conquer Europe promptly, and that the results they produced be finer, lest the world become so polluted by ill-practiced magic and people dangerously ill-educated on proper religious matters, that the overall goal of bringing order to mankind would be more likely to give this order over to unkingly tyrants like the aforementioned Caesars. These concerns were widely held among the Scions of Gold, and the nobility of many cities in the empire put so much money towards the cause of further campaigns that we can be assured these families were in agreement. Before we depart, I will tell you that the lands of Bassiana and Lemusa together were called Pannonia, which stems from phrases in Lost Silurian that were still circulated at the time of the conquest. The rough meaning can be taken to be place where there are marshes and forests, only that both environments are taken to be beasts rather than places in the strict meaning of the words. Since the forests of Europe are generally full of haunted things and places humans never go, it would not be hard to imagine that the Silurians had come to see their surrounds as being a life unto themselves, and had they only seen the entire world, they would have been quite correct. Anyway, I tell you this name so that it goes not entirely forgotten as the king passes these lands by. As for all the reasons stated above, he left for the north less than a year after the parting celebrations at Apollon, now directing his armies towards the endless peoples Manos' loyal had warred furiously with millennia ago. These were the Germanians, and as I often like to point out, this name is used to refer to a collection of people so vast that the average Germanian is as foreign to another Germanian as a Germanian was to the invading host, who were Greeks, Scythians, Saka, Cimmerians, Hyrcanians, Tauri, Carpiani, Getae, and the increasingly subdivided branches of the Lithosis, from the pragmatic Dunagol in the far north to the esoteric Anthropophagi of the far east, who, as their name begins to suggest, drank human blood and were rumoured to take flesh as meat also. It was through Gwena Greekspeaker that a delegation of these near-mute people from a distant world were present, but it was important that all those people who were directly descended from the first men get a chance to participate in the forming of the new order, according to the king himself. To simplify matters, they were Bosporans, a name which was being widely used to refer to almost any kind of person you could think of, and that was entirely by design. By the summer of the year 172 prior, Pairisades had conquered a town called Nitrawa, the second capital of the dangerous Marcomanni chiefdom. This occurred without notable action. Mixing peoples from outer and inner Germania, this chiefdom was rich in useful guides and willing defectors, which made the first months of progress easy. Nitrawa was close to the northwestern reaches of the Sarmatian mountains, and featured extremely fertile rivers and woods, which the Germanians did not know how to properly use. Or, I should say, that any progress they made was destroyed in persistent wars, and so there was not much skilled tradition outside of that particular field. It was lamented how it was a superior location for a colony to Bassiana. However, I think that no matter the choice made here, the chance of the result superseding the fame of Dorius' Neo-Philippopolis was low. Since the Bosporans had gained valuable information on where the Marcomanni were hoarding their wealth, a plan emerged in which the two armies would march west and then north into the furthest reaches of the Sarmatians, where the mountains began to be consumed by the ever taller forests, often called the Black Forests, which covered most of what land remained between there and the outer sea. The plan was changed before it began, however, because a delegation arrived from Apollon bearing important news, and the bearer-in-chief was Prince Aristippus. Fearing Apollon had fallen, Pairisades rushed to meet his son, but when he heard what the news really was, he breathed a sigh of relief and began preparing a feast, even though when you hear what the news entailed, you will consider it far worse than the complete conflagration of Apollon would have been. This thread of our story leads to many places, so I will hold you in suspense of it until another important event local to Nitrawa has been detailed. Then I will dedicate myself to the changing fate of the world fully. Know only that the rumours coming from far-off lands prompted Pairisades to return to Apollon to organise something of close importance to him, and he ordered Aristippus to go with Anakletos to march the field army west towards the city of Casurgis. The Lithosis were tasked with patrolling Nitrawa's riverlands and being ready to return to Pannonia at a moment's notice. That is why only the Apollon-based portion of the army advanced in the summer of 172, and hence only they faced the relief force the Marcomanni had sent from Casurgis. Neither side wanted to negotiate, knowing that the destruction of the men across the field from them was a prerequisite to any goals they had, and so battle was joined as soon as the two forces had the bulk of their numbers camped close enough to clash at a reasonable hour of the day. In this battle, command fell to Prince Aristippus naturally, however he did not have any experience whatsoever, having always preferred the rhetorical side of his training as a youth, and having not sought out any minor posts or apprenticeships that might serve him now. Because of this, he made a show of passing his responsibility onto his general Anakletos, joking that according to the Scions of Gold, a prince was best used to clean up after horses. Aristippus was known for such dry remarks, and Anakletos, it seems, found him agreeable, if only because it suited himself to be given command. Here is what happened in the battle Anakletos now oversaw, all of which you will usually find accredited to Aristippus, and I cannot completely dismiss the possibility of his involvement. The Marcomanni had positioned themselves on a hill that overlooked the road, so that it would be impossible to march past without confronting them. This arrangement was to their advantage, and this is what Anakletos decided to use as part of his strategy. First, he brought his army in 2 lines to assemble at the foot of the hill, then moved up so that they were positioned on the slopes. Knowing the mind of the Himanians, he produced an irresistible draw to battle, and with mechanical certainty, warriors emerged from the hilltop and came down in leaps and bounds, crying out various things and striking fear into the Bosporans. The infantry could only take heart in that they had been told their dangerous position was in aid of a strategy. First came the young men of Chrysogus, or those of slight build, carrying small shields and hurling javelins. In response, the Cimmerians and Scythians without horses shot at them with bows, and since the bone-reinforced bow of the steppe shoots further than a man can throw any object, they were able to keep the youths distant even from a lower elevation. Amid the skirmish, the main body of the Marcomanni revealed themselves and began to sing in hoarse verses. They rose tall shields and spears, although their armour was wanting, showing their distance from the true Galati, whose armour was unmatched. They came down the hill together in a mass, and since they were mostly wearing brown protectives, it was likened to a rolling log careening alarmingly. The Bosporan soldiers edged backwards, but were not able to get onto flat ground before fighting commenced. They might have been inclined to flee then, but since Anakletos himself was among the soldiers with his guards, he kept everyone at ease and made sport of the struggle. After all, his scheme to remove the Marcomanni from their hill was working, and now the horsemen attached to his army were climbing the hill on the other face, ready to emerge at the crest and menace the enemy from above and behind. Around 200 riders came down, supposedly fronted by Aristippus, half with spears and half with bows, and they clattered into the rear of the Himanians with force that threw many riders over the melee and into the ranks of their comrade footmen. This was because the Himanians had not scattered and attempted to flee the charge, leading to an unnaturally harmful collision. The Marcomanni nobles were the first to flee the battle line, seeking to regain the hill, and some of their army followed nervously. Others did not notice or care, so it was now that the battle began to spread out across the hillside, with the 2 armies forced apart into various small scenes of combat. Disoriented Himanians moved to and fro between the groups like seeds on the wind, and when they were exposed like this, the Bosporan cavalry raced around to sickle their foe in a classically Thessalian manner, since that is where most of these men of means had learned their trade after the fall of Apollon and the opening of Roman roads to Bosporan adventurers. The Marcomanni were depleted over the course of the day, never reaching the hill's summit in significant numbers. Those that did arrive there were the retinue of the chief, who was promptly spotted and pelted with arrows throughout his subsequent flight. A day's brutal action had cost the Himanians their foremost warriors, and so many nobles that the chiefdom was now ill-defined. The Bosporans are said to have lost many of their Getae recruits, who went mad with battle lust and did not preserve their lives attentively, but the number in total was no more than 500. Aristippus and Anakletos were left to conquer whatever their victory could afford them, receiving no orders from the king for the time being. Indeed, the king did not hear news of the victory at all, because he was riding away from the scene as fast as the messengers could travel. His destination was Philippopolis, where he saw that the money of Apollon had begun a great amount of building work, but completed little. The precise details were not of his concern. He went to the temple of Artemis, because he had heard that his son presided there, which was highly unusual, yet not entirely without reason, given the lack of temporal premises for government business. Dorius came out with his wife to greet his father, and was immediately, according to Diotrephes, handed the king's armaments by 2 squires. The king said nothing until the young man equipped these pieces, then, after inspecting the result, gave the same news that Aristippus had given at Nitrawa. There was to be war with the Seleucid Empire. The roots of this war take us back at least to the time of Alexander, so for the sake of brevity, I will summarize the story to the point of desiccation. For as many years as have passed since Alexander passed, the houses of Ptolemy and Seleucus have each been wanting to enjoy their old liege's legacy more so than the other. This created intolerable overlaps in their claims to monies and land, and it is so often the case that reasons like these cause states who would naturally be friends and flourish in their combined strength to instead wither each other to satisfy their pride. In 172 prior, the matter of the season concerned shipping in the Inner Sea. The Ptolemies wanted to control a greater portion of their extensive exports, and the Seleucids wished to carry on using only their own ships to conduct this trade, which had the effect of reducing the price of their wares, while giving their navy continuous excuses to loiter in Ptolemaic ports with troublesome intent. This trouble exceeded the calm of King Ptolemy XII, and it is said that the final straw was that the rowdy drinking of Seleucid crews in the ports of Alexandria was so loud that the king was unable to hear his evening entertainment in his home, and so he went out and confronted the louts in a state of dress not befitting a monarch. Realizing his mistake, and with little change of affairs at the docks, a war became a convenient and face-saving way to remedy the issues close at hand. That is what I've made of all I've learnt of this incident, since otherwise I have found no compelling reason why war was joined at this time. Although there is something to be said of my speculation about prior schemes to have Dion killed. Since they had failed, and since Dion's position threatened the Seleucid cities of Syria, there must have been those who told the king that the stink of the Bosporans was apt to frighten the Seleucids off, or conversely, have the king's two most pressing enemies kill each other in a war that would be peacefully distant from Alexandria. Dion received orders to investigate the possibility of attacking Tyre to instigate the fighting, and he was found to have completed preparations for the campaign already. Dion was, I believe, in possession of like plans for every city close by to Hierosolyma, should orders or circumstances make them useful, and to march on Alexandria was likely an arrow in his quiver even then. Yet he took the news of his treaty liege's warlike demeanour well, and war was to be shortly arranged. Since this was a politically extreme act for a visiting army to take, Dion knew better than to ask the king for permission. He simply sent out a missive on a small craft that went and began to spread news in Greece that the Seleucids had declared war on the Bosporan Empire without cause, and this was what King Pairisades eventually heard. Then, with notable delight, he had Prince Darius commit to join his cousin in Old Phoenicia to pursue glory and righteous victory of one form or another. Thinking nothing of the exact military challenge, or of what could be gained in harassing very distant places like this at huge cost and risk, the king gave out his orders. Darius was made to leave his wife, with whom he was so close that she attended court with him below the idol of Artemis, so that he could go to Byzantion, an allied city on the cusp of the Black Sea, and assemble his expedition. He was openly appalled at the order, and refused to bring his retinue from Philippopolis, proclaiming, "If the duty of my line is to rule, then the duty of my line is also to die. So I will go alone to ensure that no one I rule dies without the fates first having my life to consider." Because of this sentiment, he took only a few trusted companions and left his people to carry on their business. However, there were those who took the new business upon themselves, and so Darius was obliged to turn back and join with a gathering force marching behind him. It was less an army of soldiers and more a horde of the unemployed, the gamble-prone, the desperate, and the mercenary, but also the pious, for there was a slant to the campaign which Darius himself bolstered with his fealty to Manos's ways, that being the chance to bring the knowledge of how to order mankind to a place that it would not reach quickly without a stately expedition of the kind the war demanded. And so, all these people for whom Darius had not planned came to join his venture, and their example would be followed by others in their path. The ailing order of old was to be challenged by the immortal order of older still, and a great war was upon the world of the East now, which hardly anyone knew the cause of, and not very many would live to see the end of.